Perfect. And I will begin with the requisite public meeting announcement. So if you all will bear with me for just a minute while I read what I am supposed to read. All right, to conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by FOIA and the emergency ordinance, this board needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. It's a bit cumbersome, so I ask you in advance for your patience. First, because each member of this board is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each board member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. I will go first. Scott Stroh, calling and joining the meeting from Mason Neck, Virginia. Do we have Julie?
Hi, Julie Almacy, calling from Mount Vernon.
Hi, Julie. Gretchen?
Gretchen Bulova, calling in from Fairfax, Braddock District.
Patrick Lennon is excused. George?
Hi, it's George Alber. I'm calling from Centerville, Virginia.
Cameron Brummett is excused. Denise?
Hi, Denise Dressel, calling from Haymarket, Virginia.
Mary?
Mary Lipsey from Springfield, Virginia.
Liz Maurer?
Hi, this is Liz Maurer from Bellevue, Virginia.
Great. Glad you're with us, Liz. And Laura Wickstead is excused. So let's see. So I assume everybody heard everybody else? All good? All right. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of this board. If all are in agreement, just say aye.
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 Aye, excellent. Second, having established that each member's voice may be heard by every other member, we must next establish the nature of the emergency that compels these emergency procedures, the fact that we are meeting electronically, what type of electronic communication is being used, and how we have arranged for public access to the meeting. Therefore, I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for this board to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, FOIA's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of this board and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that this board may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated telephone line, and that the public may access this meeting by calling 1-415-655-0001. Finally, it is next required that all the matters addressed on today's agenda must address the state of emergency itself, are necessary for continuity in Fairfax County government, and or are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and the discharge of this board's lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is so moved. Is there any dissenting opinion? And I'm assuming we have no members of the public.
Mr. Dank has joined us.
Oh, just joined us. Excellent, Mr. Dink. How are you?
Well, actually, he's a member of the public, so he can't speak.
Okay, oh, that's right. Well,
Sorry.
I'm saying hello nonetheless. We welcome you to the meeting, sir. I'm glad you are with us. Before we jump in to the business of the meeting, I just want to extend my thanks and appreciation to all of you for your flexibility in rescheduling the meeting. Very much appreciate that. And it's great to be with you all today. But again, thank you for your your last minute flexibility there and your openness to finding another convenient date so we could continue with our meetings and continue with our work. Kamala, did you want to say anything on behalf of the supervisor, or are we all good?
I will just quickly note that we had a quick conversation about this meeting this morning, and he regrets that he's not able to spend the time with us for every meeting because he's so excited about this project and he sees this as something we have a great opportunity to do here. And he just wanted me to extend to you all, thank you for the work that you're doing and for making this a reality.
Thank you. I would just briefly add to that the meeting we referenced earlier was the meeting of the South County Tourism Task Force that the supervisor has convened, which is really doing some exciting work. And although not specifically discussed this morning, I think our work in preparation for the 250th will dovetail and be very closely aligned with the work of the Tourism Task Force. So obviously we have a particular charge we need to fulfill within a particular time frame, but I think as we continue to move forward with our work, Pamela, I think there would be value in perhaps this group learning more about what the Tourism Task Force is doing and vice versa at the appropriate time, so we can ensure that there is alignment. Obviously, there is some overlap in composition and membership. Cameron, Mount Vernon are on the Tourism Task Force as well, but that's just something that I think, given we've had these back-to-back meetings, is just something to keep in the back of our minds for a future discussion.
Well said, agreed, Scott.
Thank you. All that said, did everybody have a chance to review the minutes of the last meeting? And if there are not any questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Mary Lipsey so moves.
Thank you, Mary. Is there a second? Surely we can get a second. Somebody should second. Thank you, Gretchen. I see you waving your hand. All in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
All right, excellent. See, Denise, I remembered this time to do the minutes, so I'm getting better at this. Thank you. The only other administrative update I did want to just note, I very much appreciate the suggestions for other folks to come on board and join this work group. And I just wanted to confirm that the two folks that I had specifically recommended were Ann Barnes and Ed Henderson. I am still in conversation with folks at George Mason University. The other thought that occurred to me was the possibility of Renard Gray. Renard Gray is the supervisor chief ranger at Mason Neck State Park. He's been involved in a number of other activities broadly in the county. And I think he may offer some valuable input and insight that would be of benefit to our work as well. If there are other suggestions, or if I missed any suggestions that were communicated previously, by all means, we can get them on the record, but I don't think we need a formal vote. Correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, but after this meeting, if we're comfortable with Ann and Ed, and if y'all are comfortable with just letting me continue to explore with George Mason, who is the best representative they're trying to decide on their end still, or if there are questions about Renard, I'm happy to reach out to those folks next week. Are there any other thoughts, or are we comfortable with those 3 or 4 folks, just me extending the invitation more formally?
Scott, I just
I think
wanted to remind you that Laura Wickstead had put forward somebody as well.
All
And
right.
I can, again, send that name to you. Excuse me,
Thank you.
Gretchen.
No, that's fine.
I apologize for missing that one. I was trying to go back and make sure I didn't miss anything, but being out of the office for a while here, I apologize for that. So if you don't mind just forwarding that to me, Denise, I'm not hearing any dissenting opinion about those 4 or 5 folks, so I will proceed with extending that invitation and welcome them to join us at the next meeting if they're able to do so. Are there other administrative updates or questions from anybody else before we move on to our first primary business matter? All right, we're moving right along. So at the last meeting, building off of the wonderful presentation from Gretchen and Patrick 2 meetings ago about prior commemorations in Fairfax County, I think we had a really productive and beneficial conversation about how we want to structure our work going forward. And we focused, as you will recall, a lot of that conversation on a proposed committee structure. I agreed at that meeting to generate the list of proposed committees as well as some short descriptions based on our conversation of what those committees theoretically could be responsible for and what they could focus on. That was attached on the second page of the agenda that was sent out. So at this point, I am very happy. It's clearly, a draft, but I'm very happy to open the floor for any comment or discussion about those, the proposed committee structure, the responsibilities, anything I've missed, anything we want to add. So the floor is open for discussion.
Scott, this is Mary. Under Youth and Family Engagement Committee, I'm thinking of community groups like scout groups, PTA, homeowners associations, or maybe those are elsewhere. But I didn't see like scouts or PTA organizations.
No, I think that's a great point. When I was writing out these descriptions, I thought of other potential groups that we would want to engage within each of these communities, but I was resisting the temptation to list them specifically.
Okay.
Because in some cases that list could become almost as long as,
Right.
that could become its own report. So you'll notice that, I referenced in certain locations, organizations or entities with whom these committees would want to particularly potentially collaborate, but maybe I need to adjust the language slightly so it doesn't seem as exclusive and just adjust the language where it says perhaps responsible for coordinating with with organizations, including but not limited to, or something like that, that makes it clear that the ones listed specifically are not the only ones.
Well, the ones that are there are both county professional.
Sure.
And so I was sitting there thinking that if we're going to have community involvement, that maybe we should list a couple examples of community involvement.
Okay.
So Scott, did you envision where would the history groups go and the arts community and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it got, again, I have no pride of ownership over this. This is all for consideration. You're right. At the last meeting, there was discussion about history groups, art groups, other community groups. And I was trying to think of a way to consolidate some of those. So in my mind, at least for our purposes at this point in draft form, I was kind of grouping those under what I'm referring to as the coordinating committee, which is clearly not a good name, but I could not come up with anything better to call it at this point. My one concern, if we have a group for history and a group or committee for history and a committee for arts, we already have 8 proposed committees here, and there's only like 10 of us. And obviously we'll be inviting other people to join these committees, but it just seemed to be getting a little top heavy in the number. So my thought was what is tentatively called the coordinating committee would be the group responsible for making sure that any other entity, whether arts, humanities, historic, cultural, genealogical, or otherwise not referenced specific to any of the other committees, was brought into the fold. But I'm open to other thoughts about how best to do that.
Yeah, I think maybe if we just tweak the name a little, not that I can think of anything right now to help you out, but it's kind of like, it needs to be broken into like the youth and family programs and then the organizational coordination. Because that's a big job, right?
It is.
I mean, and so maybe Mary, that's where civic associations go and the patriotic organizations, and I mean, it's huge.
So if others have thoughts on that, or if others are brilliant at coming up with effective and clear names for committees, I would welcome your suggestions. I wrestled with that one for a while in terms of the best name, and then finally was like, I got to get this out to y'all. So I mailed it in, admittedly. But are we generally comfortable with thinking of that as yet to be effectively named committee, the one that will focus on these types of other organizations?
Yeah, I think that works well.
All right.
Because you're right. I mean, there's only so many of us and everybody has to take a committee, right? That's how
Right.
what your vision is. Yeah.
Even with the other people that we add, we're getting stretched pretty thin as a work group if we get up to 10 or more committees. And it also, just from my opinion, just gets confusing as far as and not as efficient in coordinating the work. Other thoughts, questions, feedback concerning the proposed committee structure?
I just see activity and the coordinating committee are very close together in terms of what they're doing. One's identifying, planning, and implementing, the other one's communicating and coordinating.
I think that's a fair point.
Do you think the activity needs to be like the programming?
Oh, okay.
Is that's how I took it? Doesn't mean that's what you meant, Scott. But
No, it is absolutely what I meant. And I used the word activity because in the board matter, it stated specifically civic, cultural, historical, and educational activities, not programs. So I was trying to mirror the language in the board matter for some consistency, but I was absolutely thinking of it as the programming committee and really programming events and activities with the exception of what would be the signature event, because it was clear, and Gretchen, you can probably speak to this better than I, that one of the things you all learned in the prior commemorations is that whatever your signature event's going to be, it needs its own dedicated committee and dedicated effort.
exactly. Yeah.
And I think it was, we actually referred to this committee as the program committee in our meeting last month. My only change was to mirror the language in the board matter for some consistency.
No, and I totally agree. And sometimes, like most of us here coming from the museum field, so, we're using our museum speak, right? So I think activity, if you want to keep it consistent, I think that's fine.
And then conversely, the coordinating committee or whatever we call it, would be more about building affinity and collaboration. Obviously, a lot of these overlap at some level. The groups that the coordinating committee will be engaging with will very likely have multiple points of intersection with the activities that are going on. But I do see a difference in the coordination of those groups' involvement with and the implementation of the event or the activity itself. Other thoughts?
I'm just wondering if what do you think of this? And feel free to say no, like the public outreach instead of coordinating, or public outreach coordinating.
Or outreach committee?
Yeah.
I think that would work. It's certainly a heck of a lot better than coordinating. I see Julie has her hand up.
Can that be married with the marketing and communications where the whole thing can just be public outreach and communications? Do we need to have multiple committees trying to promote the event?
But I don't think that was necessarily promotion. Like, I'm going to wear my Patrick Lennon hat. Yeah, I think he would advocate that the marketing communications stay separate from like the handling, the care and feeding of the community groups, right? That those are two different things.
And we had a coordinator for the 275th on the Sheriff's Department, and she actually coordinated all the organizations that were going to be in the signature event and got notification out to them and planned where they worked and all that, and incredible hours that she spent on that. And we, of course, we were supportive, but to me, I agree with Gretchen. It's different from marketing the events to the public, publishing, press releases or whatever. They're two different things to me. But I do like the word outreach.
I like outreach as well. And admittedly, one of the challenging parts in creating the committee structure is wanting to make sure you segment responsibility, but you also have some efficiency. So I did think about perhaps that coming under marketing and communications. So that I think that's a fair and valid question to raise. But when I went back through my notes from the last meeting in greater detail, there were several references or some context for why they should be different. So ultimately, I decided I would propose them as two different and just see what the general consensus was. I readily admit, just as George Mason would have agreed, with fewer committees of fewer people. So the whole notion of 8 committees is just kind of blowing my mind a little bit. But it seems like for something of this magnitude, that there's also value in a structure that, at least at the outset, provides for as broad a coverage of the responsibilities as possible, and maybe some things will be consolidated going forward. What do y'all think about the inclusion committee? That was another one I spent quite a bit of time sort of thinking about how to articulate. Did I seem to capture what you think makes sense, and what was the nature of our conversation about the importance of such a committee at the last meeting? Welcome some thoughts specifically about that one.
Again, from a teacher point of view, I would emphasize that this is emphasizing the past and the present, that we want to talk about, the diversity from the past and also in the present and what we are working towards. So there's an emphasis on, African Americans and women, et cetera, from 1776 and also into the 2026.
Sure, absolutely, Mary. Thank you. That's certainly a fundamental pillar of what we're doing. Absolutely.
Hey, it's George. I disconnected and rejoined you in a better mode. I was driving before. I'm sorry.
Well, we're glad you made it to your destination safely.
But I do have a comment, and it's a little late to the top. It's the same topic, but back on the youth, the discussion of the youth group.
Yes,
I
sir.
also, when I saw that, I also thought about having, for lack of a better term, a real kind of student's voice, even very closer to this committee. Like the school board has a student representative. The Fairfax NAACP has a youth council that really is almost like a peer organization, giving direct input as opposed to just to making sure that we touch base. Not that it's not important that we do this. I don't mean to sound as bad as I'm about to sound. Not just touching base with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and all that kind of stuff, but actually getting the voices of youth. I'm a good one to talk, right? I'm a typical stereotype here myself, but so that we really get their views. I was really moved. I think it was one of the themes about the fact that so many of our founding fathers were actually pretty young people. And they were founding fathers, not founding mothers and wives and friends and so forth.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Getting somebody closer to us than just the group that we interact with.
I think that's a great suggestion. We did talk about that at the last meeting. I didn't reference that in the committee description, but I can make more clear. So I guess there's 2 ways to think about it. We could think about it as this committee having some number of members be students. Or George, are you suggesting that there be sort of a separate committee just comprised of students?
No, I was probably thinking more of the former, but
Okay. Then what I might suggest, if it's okay with everybody else, is that at least at this point in this particular case, I can just add a sentence that simply says this committee will include, a percentage of representation, an appropriate, I'll figure out something, but I'll make clear that specifically that this committee will, the composition of this committee will include a student or students from the county.
If you think it makes sense, yeah. Either way would be good.
Okay. Everybody comfortable with that?
Yep.
All right. Anything else about the proposed committee structure?
I think it's a good start.
Thank
I
you.
did have one other thought also on the group that you were just discussing when I came back in. You were referring the last committee there, the coordinating committee. One of the ways I thought about that was, again, in order to actually accomplish this and to hit on all the themes that you want to hit on, it's almost like building, you're all probably much more experienced at this than I am, but building alliances and partnerships with organizations that are relevant to, for example, being inclusive, that are relevant to, involving youth, that are relevant to anything else, but, really not just coordinating. Coordination is a huge part of it, making sure everybody knows what piece they're going to supply and how it interacts with everybody else, but just getting them to the table sometimes in the first place and in the same spirit, if you want to call it that, and in following the same themes, especially to Scott's presentation of that survey the last time we talked.
Sure.
Especially in this world where there are so many different views of history.
No, I like the word alliance. So I think I can adjust the language and incorporate that in a little bit and, just tweak it a little bit to reinforce what we're talking about. Absolutely. All right. Anything else about the proposed committee structure? All right, so what I would suggest is I will make a few changes based on our conversation and send this back out to y'all, but it sounds as though there's general consensus for the concepts and the content, and we're just looking at some more minor adjustments. As if there's any difference of opinion about that, raise your hand or speak up, but I'll make these changes and shoot them back out to you next week. And then the next step will be beginning to think about other folks to serve on the committees. It's sort of my thought, and Denise, correct me if you have a different understanding, but my thought is that what we will do is, include in the report that we submit to the county board, this committee structure, and then once they have a chance to sign off or review, then we'll proceed with actually getting people to, inviting people to serve on those committees. But it's never too soon to begin thinking about folks that we would like to ask or think would be beneficial in that capacity. So I would just ask you to think about folks and either keep a running list on your own or send it to me or Denise, and we'll keep that list growing. But at this point, I don't think we need to proceed with actually assigning anybody to the committees until the board reviews what we submit to them in June. So all that leads us to the next item on our agenda, which are the key action items related to the required report. And obviously it's becoming increasingly obvious to me, at least, that we've got 2 months to get this report compiled and submitted to the board. Which is fine. That's certainly eminently doable, but I did think it would be beneficial for us all to spend a little bit of time just reflecting and discussing as necessary on what the board matter specifies as far as their expectations from us and what they expect to be included in the report. And I've listed it out here. Obviously, they want to know or listed it out in the attachments to the agenda. They want to have an understanding of the preferred approach. I think we've talked about that pretty extensively in the context of sort of the thematic pillars that the Commonwealth is focusing on, what we've learned from the various reports and studies that we've spent some time thinking about. And obviously the board matter itself articulates sort of some element of the approach. And then of course, what we have learned from other commemorations in the past, I think, that's something I think we have a pretty good handle on. We are expected to include SMART goals, which if you are not familiar with what that acronym stands for, it's goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And we're expected to provide some goals around planning, promotion, and types of activities. I think that is certainly something that would benefit from some additional insight and some additional contemplation on all of our parts. And then we're expected to provide and include in the report some guidance on basically how it's all going to come together, timetables and accountability. So there's a couple of different ways. Well, let me pause there. Any questions about what we are expected to include in the report? Does that all make sense to everybody? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And I think there's a couple different ways we can approach this. I think, by way of introduction, I think it'll be challenging if we all collectively, try to create this report over the course of our meetings. I think we all can understand it gets difficult to sort of write something. While we want to be collaborative, I think it gets difficult to write something by committee. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. I am more than happy to take the lead in writing sort of a preliminary first draft of the report. I would welcome, one or two other people's participation in that effort, just by way of having some opportunities for dialogue about particular topics or ideas or subjects, but also from a review and editing perspective. I am more than happy to do that, and will make it my goal to get something prepared in a preliminary draft form before our next meeting. Or we can just divide up different sections and each of us can take a different section, which may be a little bit more tedious and difficult, but I wanted to at least open the floor for your thoughts about how best to proceed. Again, I am more than happy to take the lead in drafting the initial report, but again, would welcome both the participation of one or two other folks and then a full work group collaboration and participation in reviewing the draft. Or if y'all really want to divide it up, I think that would work as well. But so what do y'all think?
I guess I have questions. How specific are they wanting? Because I'm looking at timetables. Are they looking for, well, we're going to have so many, district events and signature events and what year, et cetera? Or is it just generally, we anticipate having some events over the time period with a culminating signature event in, 2026? I guess that's a question. And the preferred approach, I mean, Gretchen and I can speak of how the 275th, it was so difficult to reach out to all these organizations and get them into a meeting and explain what we're doing and ask for volunteers. So again, I don't know how specific they want, or just that we want to reach out to groups and get their input and then go from there. So I'm asking questions, I guess.
Sure, no, that's a great question. That's the purpose of this agenda item, Mary. So good work. It's my understanding and my thought that this is much more of a higher level document. More of, I would think of it more as a strategic framework than a detailed articulation of everything that's going to happen. So to your question specifically about timetables, at least in my preliminary thinking, and y'all can correct me if you have other thoughts, I'm thinking high level framework, we will, 2022, we will focus on promoting the effort while planning is underway. There'll be a, budget request in 22, 23, 20, each year, program, activities and programs will begin in whatever year it is. I think the timetable is much more of a framework or a work plan for making everything happen rather than a schedule of events or activities.
Okay.
And I think it will very much be very much a high level sort of articulation of how to structure the work going forward, in addition to a sort of an articulation of sort of guiding principles and core themes and pillars and things of that nature, but at a much higher level than something that's more granular and tactical.
Okay.
I don't think there's any way we can do anything more detailed
Right.
as a preliminary work group. I think those more detailed questions and answers will be delivered by all those with whom we will engage in the work going forward.
Okay. Well, I'm wondering if I can volunteer Gretchen and me to work on timetables since we went through the 275th together. Gretchen, are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine. And then, it'll need to have the county processes inserted
Right.
that I don't know about.
Right. Getting
Or I
permits.
know enough to be dangerous, yeah.
Right. Well, I was just sitting there thinking we could figure out, by this time a signature event location should be selected and that kind of stuff, based on what we did for the 275th.
I think that would be a good exercise to do, Mary, even if Scott takes,
Right.
whacks it back to just
Right.
the core things. That actually would be a good kind of activity for us to throw out for everybody to, to provide input on too.
And set goals. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, Scott?
No, I think that makes sense. I think there are more detailed elements of this larger effort that we will clearly need to discuss and begin to put down on paper, so that we stay on track and hold ourselves accountable for what we need to do. I think as you've said, and as I think we've said, some of that level of detail may not need to be specifically included in what we submit to the county in June, but it's good to have it in support of the larger effort, even if it's not specifically in the report. So I'm thinking of, a more, in what we submit to them in June, they very well may ask for more details or have questions about specificity once they review it. But I do think that, at least given my conversations with the supervisor, what they're most looking to receive from us by June is again, a higher level sort of framework that will provide a broader understanding of what we need to be doing and what we need to be thinking about in the coming years.
I have a comment and or a question.
Yes, sir.
I've done strategic plans. I worked many years for General Electric and then fewer years for an internet startup company. And for a long range plan, and they usually weren't even this long, they'd be, a couple of years at the longest. We always started out not with the fact that even if we knew we were going to have a meeting or something, we started out with, what is the strategic intent of what we're doing? So when the Board of Supervisors looks at this 250th, I'm sorry, I got 225 in my head but the 250th anniversary of 1776, are they thinking about it in terms of, we want to accomplish these types of meetings? Or are they thinking in terms of, we want to deliver this kind of a message or this kind of a statement about Fairfax County at this juncture? Because if it's the latter, then you would focus first on, what are those, for lack of a better term, what are those strategic initiatives or strategic statements you want to make? And then what are the most important things you can do to make those, as opposed to focusing in right away on, in other words, what's the intent of the strategic or the, what do you call it? The signature event. What's the intent of that? Why are you having it at all? What's the outcome you want to have in the county of it? That kind of.
Sure. I think,
that kind of thinking.
I think clearly
not
this
clear
report,
thinking on my part, but anyway.
no, I think from again, this is just my perspective. I think clearly this report needs to articulate the larger purpose and intent of this commemoration.
Right.
Specifically in relation to the county, county residents, and those that we hope will come to the county to benefit and experience whatever the actual offerings end up being. And I think clearly some statement of purpose and intent needs to be included. I don't think they're looking for this report to state as specifically the anticipated or aspirational outcomes of every activity or every outcome. I don't think they're looking to say, well, the signature event, we hope will achieve the following 4 outcomes. I think they're more looking for so I would not think of it. I'm intentionally not using the word strategic plan. I'm thinking of it much more as a framework.
I agree.
Denise is raising her hand. Yes, Denise.
I agree.
I think the other thing to remember is certainly the other county supervisors are aware of this because they approved the board matter. But I do think it's fair to say that the other county supervisors and the county executive are probably not as well informed or engaged with the process. So it's still very early. So I think they're also looking for this report to be an educational tool for the county more broadly, the supervisors and the county executive and staff. So there is a broader collective understanding of why this is important, what it will involve, what will be necessary, and why, and what the benefits will be. And then from there, we create the expectation that, okay, we hopefully create some affinity around the larger effort more broadly, and we create some expectation of where and when we're gonna need some help.
And Scott, again, this is just the teacher in me. I just think of themes, and we're not ready to decide on them, but to me, this is a time to celebrate and to educate and to unite our county. And that's what I've been thinking in terms of if this is the 2026. And I think that's what George is trying to say. If we are looking at the signature event, are we just, going to celebrate? Are we going to do something more than celebrate? And again, that I agree. I don't think that needs to be in the report, but be anticipating if the Board of Supervisors asks, what is the intent of this, group and all of these committees?
Sure. I mean, I think the one thing I would say, what I am contemplating at least is incorporating into the report that we give to the county at a very, very high level, some of what we have been discussing that was identified in the various studies that have been undertaken.
Right.
Because we need to create a framework for everybody at the county level, a framework for their collective understanding about how we are envisioning this commemoration philosophically and conceptually. and while I am certain there will be elements of the commemoration that are celebratory, I do think we need to make clear, given everything we've discussed up to this point, that this is a commemoration about much more than 1776, and that we're not looking at the totality as fundamentally celebratory. This isn't just, fireworks and parades, as we've discussed. And if we're going to make that point, which I think we're all in agreement is important, then we need to provide some context for why. And I think we've got that context. So I think certainly in the early parts of the report, when we're talking about purpose, intent, why it's important, I do think it will be necessary for us to have some sort of a narrative articulation of this. This is what I mean by sort of the approach, that and some of this is reflected in the board matter, where it talks about looking beyond I forget the exact language, but looking beyond 1776 for the continuing fulfillment of the promises made in 1776 through time up to the present and to the future, and that this isn't just about the war. This is about ideas that continue to have relevance, meaning, and value today. So I think that's that sort of expression I certainly envision stating very clearly up front. And then that what is included in the balance of the report will reflect that approach. And obviously it'll still be at a high level. I don't think I certainly am not planning in this report to be including a schedule of events, or we're going to do a program on this topic and that topic and this topic.
At 6 p.m.
Exactly. At Gatsby's Tavern, over drinks. But in any event, and as I'm sitting here thinking, and Denise, we can talk about this. We certainly don't want to overwhelm the board, but it could be that there's footnotes or attachments. The studies could be shared with the board as an attachment, but they don't have to read it. We can have snippets of it that are relevant to what the report is articulating. And if they want to look at the whole report, they can, but at least, I think it can be provided to them, but not in the body of the report per se. Other thoughts, questions? So, it sounds as though I will take a stab at this and send you all something, and I may enlist one or two of you to review that draft before it goes to the full body. If anybody particularly wants to be that person, let me know, but I will get cracking on this and move forward with pulling it together, at least in a preliminary draft format, before our next meeting. And then the next meeting will clearly focus the balance of our time on reviewing that draft report. So we have, late May or the second part of May and June to make any necessary changes. Let it have one final review by y'all before we send it to the board. How does that sound?
Now, Scott, do you want Gretchen and I to try the timetables for you or not?
I think, as said, I think it's fine for y'all to begin to pull some of that together. I think that type of thinking and documenting those types of timetables is going to be important. Whether or not it's all specifically included in the report, I defer to the two of you regarding how best and the schedule for doing so. I think capturing that will be helpful no matter what.
Okay.
And appreciate you making that offer and both of you thinking about that. All right, we're moving right through our agenda. I like it. So the next item on our agenda is just Q&A and open forum. Anything else to discuss? Any questions about anything else? Anything we're missing or need to make sure we capture? The floor is open.
I just want to mention from the Alexandria front, we had a virtual meeting with, I want to call them op sale, but they're sale 250. So it's based out of Norfolk and they're planning a sale from New Orleans to Boston, arriving in Boston for July 4th, 2026. We had a preliminary meeting with them to see if we could get some tall ships in Alexandria as part of that. So I'll keep you abreast of that. This is like a long-term, process, but tying in from Fairfax County is not hard to do. Because when we have this tall ship event, there'll be lots of ships coming, and it just in like theory, the ships would be at National Harbor, and it's where the Potomac River boat water taxis dock, like where you go to, I'm not exactly sure where it is, where you end to go to the baseball game, but whatever that's called, I forget. And then in Georgetown, so they'll be, in theory, in the whole waterfront area. So anyway, just know that's going on, and we have to pick a liaison from Alexandria to be the coordinator to the or the representative rather to Sail 250. So we're working on that. But that's cool. I mean, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about ships coming up the Potomac. And
just remember, Gretchen, I really enjoy sailing, so don't forget about me. No, that's wonderful.
Well, I
That's
could just
exciting.
pull right up to Gunston Hall, right? And Mount Vernon.
I will kayak out to them and they can bring me on board.
Right. I mean, if Mount Vernon can have the Hermione, right?
That's right.
You must have the ability to have
I'm gonna
big
need to
ships.
construct some sort of a dock.
I think
No, that's exciting stuff.
I think that does raise the issue, though, and I'm not sure whether it was brought up in the committees, but having that interjurisdictional component to whatever Fairfax County is doing, making sure that we are, talking to Arlington and Alexandria and maybe even Washington across the Potomac, because it is, certainly a regional. Of course, and we do have southern neighbors and western neighbors too, but just making sure that we are communicating with our neighbors. I don't know if that's be in a committee, but just someplace noted that this is something that we should be doing.
That's a great point.
And for the War of 1812, sorry, George, there was kind of a designee from all the different jurisdictions that would talk every once in a while just to coordinate what everybody was doing. So that maybe that's something we just put in the back of our heads. Anyway, sorry.
Yes, George.
Is it possible that some of them are planning similar activities?
It's certainly possible. I've not heard, nor am I aware of any other county, certainly not any neighboring county or having commenced a similar effort. I know at some point before too much more time passes, the Commonwealth will likely be providing more encouragement to the counties. I think one of the reasons why Fairfax County is so far ahead is because many of us in the county, Gretchen, Mount Vernon, and we've been thinking about this for a couple of years and have had discussion about it with Supervisor Stork and others, and then
Gotcha. Yep.
We just found very receptive and responsive leadership in the county, and Supervisor Stork got the ball rolling. I'm not aware of other counties having progressed to this point in a formal sense. But I would expect that many, many more will as we get closer. But I think it is a good point that we will, and I think it would make sense to build into the report in the appropriate place some statement about that interjurisdictional piece, Denise. So I think that's a good thing to reference.
Seems
Yeah,
like to be-
not having any familiarity with how those intersections work, it would probably be to our advantage, however, to initiate it. And I can't find the exact right word for it so that we can kind of not be driven by it, but drive it.
Sure. Any other open forum questions or topics for discussion? Comments?
I did wanted to mention that Patrick Lennon had, and I think Mary had maybe mentioned the financing part of this, possibly either being in the Park Authority or in
Right.
Visit Fairfax. And if we have a specific recommendation for the board, that ought to be included in the report.
Yep. Agreed. I think that the report will include some information about fiscal agent, sort of, very rudimentary sort of business plan, for lack of a better word, funding model, things of that nature.
I think at one time we also said something about making sure that each supervisory district has a representative who responds or is coordinates with the committee somehow, whether officially or unofficially.
Sure. Yeah, that's come up on several occasions, and it's in the notes and it's in the minutes. So whenever I go back to write this, I'm going to go back through all that stuff, and I think we'll want to make sure we state that very clearly, because that's important politically, but it's also important in terms of building constituency and support. Anything else? All right, Denise, can you remind us when the meeting in May, what the date of the meeting in May is, please? Or I can try to look it up.
Just give me, somebody else was shouting it out.
21st. That's the third Friday, 21st.
Perfect. So we will reconvene on May 21 at 2:30 in the afternoon. I will send out to you all the draft report in advance of that meeting. The agenda for that meeting will focus largely on reviewing that report. We will hope that some of the other folks that we've identified will be able to join us at that meeting. And if there is not anything else for comment, question, or discussion, I will very happily entertain a motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn? All right, there we go. Do we have a second? All right, George, good work. All in favor of adjourning? Well, thank you all very, very much. Great meeting. Appreciate your participation. Enjoy the weekend. Stay safe, and we will talk to you later.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.